Hello, Dragon Dreamers! Welcome back. Today I'm going to talk about something that is kind of fun, maybe a little farcical, but also serves as a lesson in some options for how a GM can interpret the rules, because that's part of our role. Um, so I'm going to be talking about darkness magic. Stay tuned. So in BECMI, there are light spells and darkness spells. More specifically, there's the spell Light, which has the reversal spell Darkness, and Continual Light, which has the reverse spell Continual Darkness. Now, Light/Darkness lasts only for a set amount of time, whereas Continual Light/Continual Darkness each have permanent spell durations. In other words, until dispelled. So you can cast Continual Light or Continual Darkness on a pebble, for instance, and it will just always be shining light or sort of emitting darkness. But there is something kind of weird about this. Yes, it's magic, and magic does not need to be explained, but once a physical effect occurs in the game setting, it's on to the GM to interpret how the spell works, unless the spell explicitly explains that. So I'm going to unpack this in just a bit, but suffice it to say that the crux of the issue here is we know perfectly well how light works, not how magic works, but once light is produced, we can assume that it works the same way that normal light works in our world, because light is a substance. But darkness is not a substance. It's an absence of light in the real world. And yet somehow these darkness spells do not block light sources from shining in. They create darkness. So what does that actually even mean? That's on us to interpret. So what my players did is something that players typically do in these games. As soon as their spellcasters got Continual Light and therefore Continual Darkness, because it's the reverse of the same spell, they started casting Continual Light and Continual Darkness on things like little pebbles or marbles or something, and they would have these like Continual Light marbles in one bag and on their belt, and Continual Darkness in another pouch on their belt. And the concept is that if they want things to be illuminated, they pull out a Continual Light pebble, and it's illuminated in the radius of whatever it is, right? Let's just say for the sake of argument it's, I don't know what it is, it's 30 feet or something. And if you pull out a darkness pebble, the concept is that suddenly that area is shrouded in darkness in a 30-foot radius. And that you could throw it and that darkness sphere would move. Now, most of that is very logical, and it's the way, as I said, most of us have always been thinking about this. The light part is perfectly accurate. We know how light works physically, and so we know that a light pebble put it in a pouch will not shine light through the pouch. Maybe if the cloth is thin enough or something, but assuming it's like deer hide or something like that, it's probably not going to shine through, because we know that light producing things don't shine through that way. And and we know that, if you pull the object out, it will emit light. That makes sense. What suddenly hit me like a ton of bricks is that it doesn't necessarily follow logically that the darkness marbles would work in the same way. Here's why. So, it's true that light radiates out and is a substance that's made up of photons that shines out from a light source. That much is true. But in the real world, darkness is not a substance. It's an absence of light, right? If you block off all the light sources, the place you are will become dark. So, magical darkness, it's not exactly clear how it works. Is it a substance? Are there like antiphotons that are actually radiating out from these things you've casted on? Or does it just create magical darkness just create a space where light can't get in or something like that? Like, doesn't really say in the spell how exactly it works. So what I suddenly realized, logically speaking, is that I and my players were assuming that it radiates just the way light works, right? And that's not a safe assumption. Moreover, continual darkness pebbles are extremely powerful. Magic users get them as second level spells, so as soon as they're third level, which is when they get second level spells, they can cast them. And between sessions, or rather between adventures, like when you're back at town, if you're back at town for a week or several weeks or whatever, I mean, you could certainly get, a good handful of continual darkness pebbles, right? And you could just keep on adding to them between adventures each time, right? So it's totally reasonable that they would have these pebbles. The spell never ends unless dispelled, all right? So they were 100% accurate that they get to put these pebbles in their pouches, but I rethought this, and I thought there are some ways that a clever GM could interpret all this very differently. And I personally think that this whole continual darkness pebble thing is an interpretation that makes a second level spell really powerful. Now, to be fair, spells in BECMI are powerful. You can only cast so many of them per day. It's not like you have these 0th level spells or cantrips or whatever you can cast, a lot of the time. The spell casting chart is a lot skimpier. So the spells are supposed to be, when you cast a spell, it's supposed to be really awesome. All right, so I get that. But if a GM wanted to limit this a little bit, there is a simple way that the GM could interpret things a little bit differently, and without changing the mechanics of the spell as written, reduce the power of the spell to do what these players want it to do or expect it to do. Alright, so I'll cut to the chase and not give you any more suspense. But first, let me just read what the spell says. The reverse of this spell, continual darkness, creates a completely dark volume of the same size. Torches, lanterns, and even a light spell will not affect it, and infravision cannot penetrate it. Alright, and second part, a continual light spell will, however, cancel it. Alright, so let me tell you how I'm going to interpret this in a different way than most people do. You could interpret that as meaning that nothing stops the darkness, right? It doesn't say that anything stops the darkness, so how do we know that if you were to put a darkness pebble in your pouch, that it wouldn't just go right through the pouch? Like who said, like when I say right through, like that, I'm still thinking radiating antiphotons, right? Like it says it creates darkness. It creates an area of darkness. So you could simply say that nothing blocks it. You can't block darkness the way you can block light. It just works differently because darkness is not a substance. Now that puts a very different complexion on things because it means that the PCs now have to figure out how to use a continual darkness pebble effectively, because wherever they take it, even in the middle of an inn, even like the inn where they cast it, you're going to have patrons complaining to the innkeeper, there's some wizard in room 2, like made everything dark, in a 30-foot radius from room 2. So it will limit them and make it so that they have to think carefully about how they use it, not just walk around and be able to just produce darkness whenever they want and put it and get rid of it whenever they want. There's another wrinkle to this, which is, remember that the spell says that continual light cancels it. Now, it doesn't say exactly how this works, however. Do you have to explicitly cast continual light with the intention of canceling continual darkness? Or does continual light, even on a continual light pebble, cancel continual darkness? Because if it does, then a foe could pull out their own light marble and permanently dispel your continual darkness pebble, and you'd have to cast continual darkness on it all over again. Also, there's this question of, does a continual light pebble, if it does dispel any continual darkness pebbles, does it dispel all the pebbles or only one at a time? It's not really clear in the spell description. So another thing that you might say, if you really wanted to be mean, is that anytime there's continual light anywhere, any continual darkness that's taken into continual light would get dispelled. Now, another trick with this is you could also interpret it in yet another way, which is that continual darkness cancels continual light as well. Now, that would mean that, yes, your foe takes a continual light pebble out and boom, at least one or maybe all of your continual darkness pebbles are suddenly null and void. But their continual light is suddenly null and void because they were in the presence of continual darkness, right? So it's not exactly clear how all this works. But I think it's fun to think about these things. So, of course, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to be upfront with your players, first of all, about how you're going to rule on this stuff. All right. And that needs to happen, hopefully kind of early on. If not early on, then at least you need to kind of go, hey guys, I'm sorry, but I'm changing my ruling on how continual light and continual darkness works. But I think that a clever GM could make things interesting. And the goal here is not to be sadistic, but rather I see role-playing games as being about challenges and problem solving. So it's a resource management game to some extent. And so challenging players to kind of have trade-offs, making things too easy isn't enough of a challenge. So if you kind of make things a little bit challenging, that makes it so it's okay, you have to kind of figure out how you're going to make this work, right? And then that also means that your characters, your NPCs, or even your monsters, if they, have, some of them have spell-like abilities, or some of them actually even cast spells, if they have darkness or continual darkness spells, how are they going to use them? And on what conditions will those ones be dispelled? Under what conditions will they, work or be blocked or whatever? And the point of this is not necessarily to show how you can mess with your players or how you can, be a meanie. The point is to sort of give a little bit of a case study in one of the jobs of a GM, which is how to interpret magic. And I think here the main goal is that you want to keep things fun, and part of keeping things fun is to keep things challenging. You don't want things to be too challenging or people will get frustrated, but you don't want things to be too easy or people won't have fun, right? So you want to kind of like find, what sort of the sweet spot that causes your players to have to kind of juggle magical lightness and darkness as resources and have trade-offs with them. So, tell me what you think in the comments. This will undoubtedly be contentious because I'm, have an interpretation that like almost nobody else has. So you may go, no, Ivan, you're completely wrong. Reread the spell. You got it wrong. This is what it says. And, highlight things to me, and that's fine. All I ask is that we stay polite as always. So let's not flame each other. Let's not, be jerks. Let's just, politely share. Hey, in my opinion, I was reading the spell and it seems like it says this. All right, guys, happy dreaming.